It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey joins us from across the Atlantic in Washington, D.C. How are you?
Well, thanks, but looking forward to getting back to Paris.
Well, we look forward to welcoming you. The weather's turned cold, by the way. Ana Navarro-Pedro, Paris correspondent for the Portuguese news weekly Visão, is with us as well.
Very well, thank you.
Gregory Viscusi, reporter at Bloomberg News. How are you?
Fine.
And Georg Blum, Paris correspondent for the German weekly Die Zeit. Nice to see you. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. It's a very, very big catch for Brazil's far-right president-elect. Hot on the heels of Sunday's election, crusading magistrate Sergio Moro accepting Jair Bolsonaro's offer to head a super ministry that'll encompass justice and security. This is the same Sergio Moro who led Operation Car Wash, the probe that brought down a host of politicians and landed Lula, the country's former left-wing president, in jail.
I understand that the country needs an agenda to combat corruption and crime. If there's the possibility to implement this agenda with a convergence of ideas, the way it should be done, well, there's a chance.
Ana Navarro-Pedro?
When Sergio Moro was conducting car wash a few years ago, it was already being told in Brazil in political and intellectual circles that he would put Lula in prison, so he couldn't be candidate again for this presidential election, so he wouldn't win.
All right, but those are conspiracy theories, right?
No, and I've heard it was being told.
Yes, it's true that as a magistrate, he has launched proceedings against a disproportionate amount of people on the left. However, the left has been in power for
12 years.
A lot of the time.
For 12 years, indeed. And corruption is widely also present in the right in Brazil. So all the classical parties are, most of them are under about 40–50% of politicians or elected people in Brazil are under scrutiny from justice. But indeed, still, whether it's conspiracy theory or not, it's what was being told at the time. So we were heading, what I meant to say is that we were heading towards issue of a very, very strong and very almost dictatorial government as a result of the fragmentation of the political system in Brazil.
But on Thursday, he makes remarks saying, look, I'm going to follow the money. I'm going to stamp out corruption.
Let's hope he does. Let's see in 6 months.
Christopher Dickey, were you surprised by this nomination?
I was a little bit surprised, but I think that there's a sort of a ready historical parallel, which is Italy during and after the clean hands investigations in the 1990s, where you just had whole political parties eliminated, the entire sort of structure of the old elite was wiped out, and the idea was that you would bring in this clean, better government, and the judge who was involved in that was seen as somebody who would participate in the government and play this very positive role. But in the end of the day, who did you get as the leader of Italy after clean hands? You got the incredibly corrupt and cynical Berlusconi running the country.
So what, don't have big anti-graft probes? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think when you have these big anti-graft probes that just wipe out whole political classes who've been in power in countries where there's in fact notorious corruption, it doesn't mean that you clean house and you then get clean government. It means that you clean house and then you get a new dirty government. And I suspect that that is what is going to happen in Brazil.
Brazilian daily newspaper Estado de Sao Paulo calling up online an old front page of theirs from 2016, one where Sergio Moro vowed never to enter politics. I will never enter politics, he said at the time.
Yes.
Gregory Viscusi, your thoughts?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned a link between this guy and Di Pietro. I hadn't really thought of that, but I mean, Di Pietro would clearly wanted. He was the Italian judge who was sort of the hero of the clean hands operations. He was very clear from the beginning that he did want to enter politics, whereas this guy sort of comes in rather grudgingly. I mean, It's hard to say. I mean, corruption is a problem in Brazil. There's no question. I don't think Bolsonaro invented that. He also didn't invent that Brazil's got a major crime problem. So, I mean, unlike Trump and Salvini in Italy, who have, spread all sorts of lies about the crisis that their countries are facing. Trump recently with the caravan, Salvini about migration. In Bolsonaro's case, in his defense, he didn't make this up. I mean, the country does have a huge murder rate. The country does have a massive corruption problem. Whether he can do something about it, obviously, who knows?
Georg Blum?
Well, this all puts so much pressure on us here in Europe. We have America as a democratic development continent now, and we have to make our democracy exemplary, like a model for others now. And that is really something which we French, German, Central Europeans are not used to, I think.
And on top of it, on Brazil, the people, the evangelists, the churches that are supporting Bolsonaro, they are among the most corrupt institutions in Brazil. And there is nothing you can do about it. I remember one of them, what's the name in English? The Universal United Church of God, something like this. That one point was there were inside videos of their leaders, rolling in money in dollar bills and on yachts and in cases of. But by the end of the 90s, and they went on air through Portugal, through Portuguese press, and they didn't lose one single follower in Brazil. Though there is a big problem of ignorance, there is a problem of people being very tired with corruption and with insecurity. There was a problem with the traditional parties who didn't want to see this situation and how fed up the population was with this. And there was a problem with the party, Lula's party as well, who was stuck in the idea that Lula would be the candidate and didn't want
a perfect storm
to share power with other parties in order to defeat extreme right wing. And I don't think Bolsonaro, as you said, let's see if the guy, no. You cannot be supported by some of the most corrupt people in Brazil and go on the anti-corruption crusade. It doesn't exist.
All right, Bolsonaro, who won't be sworn in until January, but he's already got the media in his sights. In particular, the newspaper Folha de Sao Paulo, which published the story showing how outside money helped finance an illegal bulk messaging campaign over WhatsApp. The journalist who broke the story, Patricia Campos Melo, has received an avalanche of threats, including telephone calls, and her own WhatsApp account was hacked. But that's not stopping the president-elect, who's also irate over revelations he put a neighbor on his congressional payroll.
Almost all the fake news that were said about me came from the Folha de Sao Paulo, including their last story, where they said I had hired companies outside of Brazil to create a campaign of lies against the Workers' Party. A big lie, once again, fake news from the Sao Paulo newspaper, sadly.
Christopher Dickey, your reaction?
Well, look, I mean, it's a contagion of Trumpism around the world. People particularly pick up this fake news mantra. Every petty tyrant, every thug, every lousy fake Democrat in the world seizes on that and says, well, that's what Trump says, and he gets away with it. And it's incredibly convenient, whether you're Duterte or in the Philippines or you're, any of a number of other leaders, Putin in Russia. They all love this mantra of fake news. Anything that suggests that they are corrupt, that they are lying, that they are exploiting the masses of people, even the people who vote for them, anything that says that, which usually is the truth, that's fake news for them.
And we've seen this week, turning to the United States, Christopher, how Donald Trump, in the wake of what had been a toxic campaign before the U.S. midterm election, still referring to journalists as, quote, the enemy of the people.
Well, I think you get a certain whiff of desperation on the part of Trump right now.
Desperation?
We don't know. Yeah, I think so. I mean, you look at the way he's campaigning. I mean, there's a kind of a frantic effort by Trump to seize on any kind of issue. He's completely fabricated an immigration crisis. He's sending 15,000 troops to the border and saying that they should shoot anybody who throws rocks at them. What is he, nuts? Yes, he is nuts, but there's also a calculation here that he can stampede his core supporters with fear and stampede them to the polls and still somehow keep control of the House of Representatives. Most polls are showing that is not going to happen, but we don't know. Nothing is certain after 2016. But he's just basically fear-mongering, and that's all part of the picture, and the fake news allegations are part of that. If you stand up and say, this just isn't true, Mr. President, you're lying, well, that must be fake news.
Yeah, but he's keeping the conversation. We're talking about it instead of talking about the Democrats' favorite topic.
Francois, actually, Francois, you're talking about it. I wouldn't have necessarily talked about it. I mean, yeah, we do talk about it. He dominates. He totally dominates the news cycle. It's amazing to see. I don't think there's ever been such a genius at dominating the present-day news cycle.
The Democrats wanted to talk about health care.
Well, and probably most people care a hell of a lot more about health care than they do about a bunch of Hondurans and other people thousands of miles or 1,000 miles or more away from the American border who are going to be met by, you know, thousands of American troops. All that is a manufactured crisis. But he's very good at manufacturing crises, and because he is the President of the United States, and because he can deploy troops, and he can try and overturn key facets of the American Constitution, and he can raise those issues at will, those are things that have to be talked about. If he says he wants to do away with birthright citizenship, what are we supposed to say? Well, that's a lie, that's crazy. We do our best to say that's a lie and that's crazy, but the fact is he's a president and he can push it.
The U.S. president who has ratcheted up the rhetoric in the build-up to next Tuesday's midterm elections, talking about sending, as Christopher was mentioning, a growing number of troops to the border with orders to shoot any one of who throws rocks at the soldiers.
At this very moment, large, well-organized caravans of migrants are marching toward our southern border. Some people call it an invasion. It's like an invasion. They have violently overrun the Mexican border. You saw that 2 days ago. These are tough people in many cases. A lot of young men, strong men, and a lot of men that maybe we don't want in our country. But again, we'll find that out through the legal process.
Gregory Viscusi? Young men, strong men?
It's not what I've seen in the photos I've seen of the caravan, but I think Christopher's right about it being sort of a desperate ploy. I mean, he's pulled out everything this week. I mean, you know, from birthright citizenship to the caravan invasion to this non-existent trade deal with China, hoping to get some little push-up in the stock market in the days leading to the polls. He does have a look of someone who knows what's going to happen in the House of Representatives. Most likely he will keep control of the Senate, which in some ways matters more in terms of, you know, things like the Supreme Court. But he does have a look of he's really pulled out all the stops this week.
Georg Blume?
Well, we in Germany opened our frontiers to refugees 3 years ago, you remember, and today we are talking more like Trump than ever before. You know, it's amazing how things have gone, and the whole question about leadership now also in Germany is about who is going to close the frontiers more than before.
Anna Navarro.
This week, Trump was interviewed by Axios, which is a very well-known news site in the States, and it was really pushed by the interviewers, and they were telling him, but you realize with your rhetoric you are going to have journalists murdered, killed soon? Have you noticed how you have divided this country? I'm just giving the gist of it, not the actual words. And again, not the actual words, but his reaction was, but you know, that's basically what he meant was, this is how this is played, you know it. It's a play for him, and it's a play based also on his fear of the Mueller investigation, who apparently is going to go public, so we believe, after the midterm elections. And I think he's really, really afraid of what might come for him from that side. So it's fear-mongering. It's really using every wood for the fire, but it's also fear of him, of the future.
Well, let me ask you, Christopher, because you're in the U.S. right now, and the news cycle changes so fast. Last week there were those pipe bombs mailed to politicians. There was the shooting at a Jewish synagogue. Have voters, will they have forgotten all of that come Election Day?
No, I don't think they have forgotten it. I think that Trump is doing his damnedest to make them forget it. It started during the Khashoggi crisis, where he was doing everything he could to say, oh my God, there's an invasion by people coming up from the south, when they were hardly into Mexico from Guatemala at that point. But he was warning against this terrible invasion, and it was a desperate and transparent effort to change the subject away from Khashoggi, away from the fact that he's in bed with a Sharia regime in Saudi Arabia that's the most regressive conceivable regime that actually murders its opponents, strangles them, and chops them into little pieces on Turkish territory. That didn't play very well for him. Then there were the pipe bombs, where he and his supporters tried very hard to say this was all a false flag operation, this was some Democratic operative trying to blame the Republicans. And then you had a person who, was a little resentful about Trump because Trump wasn't quite anti-Semitic enough, not quite anti-Semitic enough, who then went in and slaughtered 11 people in a synagogue in the biggest massacre of Jewish people in the history of the United States in Pittsburgh. All of that happened. All of that's on his watch. All of that speaks to his incredibly bad judgment and bad leadership. And all he can do is try and drum up fear about these supposed young men supposedly storming the border when they're still 1,000 miles away from the border.
And I think
this is a pitiful spectacle.
All right, we're gonna have to take a quick break. We're gonna pick up when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is in Washington this week. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Ana Navarro Pedro, Paris correspondent for the Portuguese news weekly Visão. We're with as well Gregory Viscusi of Bloomberg News and Georg Blume, Paris correspondent for Die Zeit, the German weekly. This was the week where France's energetic 40-year-old president finally seemed to slow down, Emmanuel Macron, moving the cabinet meeting up a day so he could recharge his batteries during the long bank holiday weekend. Well, he'll need his vitamins if he's to try to poise himself as pretender to Angela Merkel's unofficial crown of Queen of Europe, the German Chancellor, this week on the back of another underwhelming performance in regional elections, confirming that this is indeed her last term in charge, and more surprising, that she is quitting the leadership of her Christian Democratic Party next month, Georg Blume.
Yes, it's really the end now for Merkel, I think. And she, even though she's saying she might keep her job the next 3 years, nobody really believes so. Because once the party has a new president, he should aspire to the chancellorship. And as it looks like, it's not assured that a friend of Merkel will get the presidency of the party. It's more or less open one now.
She's groomed the Secretary General of the party, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer. But there are other contenders.
Yes, I think AKK, as we call her, because her name is difficult to say. She would do with the Chancellor Merkel. She's her own Merkel's choice. But there are two other men now really aspiring to take over the power from the women, and there's a long, great discussion now. You might be a little bit tired of Merkel, but when you see these aspiring men once again coming up and looking for power, at least at home, my wife is saying, oh, we don't want these guys back.
Do you think that once that party conference happens in December, she'll be out for good?
Well, she could be out very soon after that. But because if, like Friedrich Merz, who is really her opponent in the party, her historic opponent, he has a good chance of winning, and then I don't think she will stay much longer.
And she crushed him politically.
Yes, of course. Now, if it's the other way around, it's
it's the way it'll unfold. Gregory Viscusi, what will this mean for Europe if Merkel is out sooner than later?
Well, it all depends who replaces her, because I mean, some of the two men you mentioned are much less keen on sort of deeper European integration than she was. And, you know, she wasn't particularly keen, but she did sort of at least pay lip service to it. I mean, you know, it always did just enough to move things along in Europe. So no, it certainly doesn't look good for Macron. You mentioned Macron earlier. I mean, he came to power with this whole grand bargain that France would reform itself and, you know, make its economy more reactive and modern. And in exchange, the Germans would accept deeper integration of the Eurozone. And he thinks he's kept up his part of the bargain. You know, you can debate that or not. But certainly with the elections in Italy and now with these changes in Germany, there's just nothing on that front that's likely to happen.
So Merkel on her way out and Macron last man standing?
He's lost a lot of his shine in Europe. Like 6 months ago, I'd still tell you that all the capitals and in southern countries were really looking at him like the white knight of Europe. And now he has totally lost his shine because he's kind of belligerent in his attitude toward nationalists in Europe. It's a kind of either-or declaration policy that doesn't fit with what we need now. We need steady. Coming from a southerner like me, from Portugal, where population doesn't like Mrs. Merkel, Frau Merkel, saying this, the truth is she means stability, continuity, and something steady in Europe. Whether we like it or not, whether we agree with her or not, at least we know there would be no adventurous policy and no swings. And we don't know who's coming after her. And Macron is a man that is not going to be able to pick up the flag from Merkel.
Chris Verdicki, lots of reactions on the hashtag world this week. I'll read this one to you. Angela Merkel is the glue holding the EU together. Her eventual retirement in 2021 is extremely significant, not only within German politics, but the EU as a whole. You heard Anna saying how she's not in a hurry to see Merkel go.
Well, I don't think really anybody who has any common sense about or belief in the idea of a united Europe is anxious to see Merkel go. At a minimum,
that's a mistake,
introduces.
She's over her top. We need somebody to replace her who just decides also the debate about Europe within Germany, Christopher. Because the last year already, Merkel couldn't move on any point considering Europe, and her successor, her successor has to deal with these problems now.
Georg, I'm sure that's true, but who are you suggesting would be that person? You really don't know who that person is going to be.
Well, yes, of course, we have three contenders who are serious.
And therefore, you have a lot of uncertainty, which is what I was saying. Yeah. It's, I think, yes, sure, if there's a new leader who can replace Merkel, who's more fresh and dynamic and willing to take some more risks and draw Germany together and maybe draw a little bit more of Europe together, that would all be tremendously positive, but we just don't know if there's anybody like that.
We didn't know in France either 2 years ago.
Well, in a situation like we have in Europe right now, any additional uncertainty, it makes people nervous.
No, of course.
All right, but before we move on, I got to ask you, Georg, what is this story out of Berlin? For 2 years, residents of the hipster Kreuzberg neighborhood have been fighting successfully Google's plan to have this sprawling campus in their neighborhood. Now an opposition municipal councilor is suggesting the U.S. tech giant instead take up residence in the old HQ of the Stasi, the former East German political police. Your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, in Kreuzberg, we always had strong resistance movements. So that if they beat Google, I wouldn't be surprised.
Actually, Germans usually are not. We are not used to that type of humor. That's a very good one.
It's not been a good week, Christopher, for Google. There was that worldwide walkout over sexual harassment practices and the way they were handled by the company this week.
Well, yeah, and that was not a story that I followed very closely. I just saw the headlines, but clearly it's an embarrassment to Google. But you know, Google is so big and so powerful. I think it's very appropriate, going back to your earlier question, that they would take over the Stasi headquarters. As a friend of mine in the intelligence world at the NSA used to say, if you want to talk about Big Brother, I'll tell you who Big Brother is. Yeah. It's Google. They know everything about you.
We've been talking about Facebook. We should have been talking about Google, Gregory Viscusi.
Absolutely. Google, the Facebook tells you, you give lots of information knowingly to Facebook when you talk about your likes and your preferences. But Google knows it automatically because it knows what you buy, it knows what you search for, it knows what you're thinking all the time. And the proof of that is anytime you're on Gmail or anytime you're dealing with Google these days, it's thinking ahead of you. It's filling in whole sentences as you try and type. It's telling you what you want to buy based on what you bought or even looked at before.
Yeah, you tend to think of doing a search.
It is a really pervasive presence.
Yeah, you tend to think of doing a search as just kind of a neutral sort of service that the internet provides. But no, that is the data that you are providing them, is what you're searching, what you're looking at. Sure. Whereas, as Christopher says, with Facebook, you know that you posted that video of your kid doing whatever. But the one thing is just, I don't know what the reason is, but the Silicon Valley world and the high-tech world is a very male world, a much more male world than the one that we live in journalism. And it really does have, the same kind of locker room pranks and boys club that you get when you have too many men together running any sort of organization.
Yeah, some phenomenon we've seen at other Silicon Valley giants.
Yeah, they're not alone on that.
Yeah, they're not alone. For the third day running, militants from Pakistani ultra-Islamist party blocked roads in major cities, enraged by the Supreme Court's decision to clear Asia Bibi, a 46-year-old woman from the Christian minority, on blasphemy charges. It looks like she is going to be able to leave prison. Latest reports suggest there's been some kind of a deal that's been cut between the government and the radicals of Tehrik-e-Labbaik, a tiny fraction of the country's political landscape they represent, but their voice is loud and their death threats extend to justices as well as Asia Bibi's own defense attorney.
I have absolutely no safety, no security. And I'm the easiest target, soft target for anybody, because I move freely, I go to my office, I go to my courts, and anybody can kill me.
Georg Blume, your thoughts? Because when the news first broke, this was hailed as a good story that she's been in prison for 8 years.
No, it's and I would still insist it's a great story because the judges did their work and put through a courageous judgment. And I've been reporting from Pakistan many years when I was living in India, and you shouldn't give too much to these images of demonstrators in the streets. We have numbers, a few thousands here, a few thousand there. Pakistan is a country of 200 million, and these demonstrations haven't been 10,000 and so forth. So I suppose there are lots of Pakistanis out there who, have good sense and support this judgment. It's not only these people on the street we see by television images there.
Christopher Dickey?
Well, I think the problem isn't the people who are protesting necessarily. The problem is an even smaller group of people who really are willing to murder those that they believe have blasphemed. And that is a really dangerous thing. And there's a long history of people, public figures, and sometimes not so public figures, being murdered in Pakistan and in other countries. But Pakistan's been particularly problematic. And Asia Bibi it's hard to say that she's been lucky being in jail for 8 years, but if she'd been on the street, I think there would have been a real problem with the possibility of her being killed. And I think it will be a real question when she gets out, too.
And there is just the problem of, a country like Pakistan should not have these sort of laws on the book. That is a basic, let's begin with the basic issue there.
They shouldn't have these laws on the books. Turns out, we did a report. You know that last Friday, Ireland rolled back its blasphemy law. 13 European nations have blasphemy laws in one form or the other.
But are they enforced?
No, not.
They're not enforced. I mean, they probably forgot. They probably forgot they're on the books.
Only waiting to be woken up.
Still there. Yeah, they're just. Listen, if Trump gets any more desperate, we'll have blasphemy laws in the United States.
Right.
One more point on this, which is how the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, the former cricket star, is handling it. On Wednesday, he took to the airwaves to warn the government wouldn't let radicals defy rule of law.
Do not be deceived by the talk of these people who are doing this for political gain and to increase their vote bank. They are not rendering any service to Islam.
Yet at the same time, there are these negotiations going on, Georg Blum. How do you think Imran Khan is doing so far?
Well, you know, these words there were reassuring, and of course he's also told us that he's supporting these blasphemy laws and he didn't want to change them, you know, which first got this woman in prison. But I don't know that we know enough about Khan's government right now and the way he's going to rule the country. I mean, he's under tremendous pressure from the United States. He has much less support right now from our Western country. It depends a lot on China and what they are investing there. So still his alliances are unclear. He's an individual whom we can, you know, not really count yet among the authoritarians. He has a very democratic culture sometimes, you know. So let's hope he'll govern the country for the best.
We'll just move on with one final thought. History is written by the victors, goes the saying. In India's pantheon of greats, the opposition Congress Party claims ownership of the legacy of most founding fathers. Most, but not all. Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, inaugurating this week the world's tallest statue, twice the size of the Statue of Liberty in his native Gujarat state, to honor the memory not of Nehru or Gandhi, but Sardar Patel, the country's first Home Secretary, remembered as the Iron Man of India for his ability to federate the nation at independence and the time of partition that followed with Pakistan.
Brothers and sisters, this statue, the tallest statue in the world, will keep reminding the world and our coming generations of the courage, competence, and vow of that person.
Chris Verdicki, will you be making a detour next time you're in India to go see this statue?
No, I won't. But you know, totemic images like that can be problems in and of themselves. I mean, I think it will be a target for a lot of hostility by large parts of the Indian population. So we'll see how it goes. It is impressive to see something that's that tall. I mean, I visited the Statue of Liberty for the first time last summer, and I thought it was huge. If this is twice as big as that, my goodness.
It's a bit of a cheap ploy by Modi, though, to try to grab the legacy of the Congress Party like this, no?
And
it's not a cheap ploy. It's very expensive.
Oh, it's a very expensive cheap ploy.
And in the end, it's always in politics, man and politics who has the biggest one. I'm sorry. It's
no, I think it's
so
one, you know,
pathetic.
We have been talking about Nehru and Gandhi. Whenever have we been talking about Patel? Maybe because there is this figure now. I mean, he is so important, this man, for Indian history. It's really the Bismarck of India.
No, he is the guy that negotiated
the unity of the country. You cannot honor him enough in India. I mean, Modi did a lot of bad things so far, but this one is really great. I mean, and it's a man from the other party, from the opposition. You know, I mean, what are we? criticizing about this gesture. I think it's marvelous. And you know, if you're reading about Patel, it's a wonderful intellectual. It's a great man. You know, you can read books about him.
And
I'll see
And it's worth it. Worth reading it.
Are those the reasons for this statue, or maybe some
No,
others?
but it's lots of reason to speak about Patel. If you want to know India
And this
better,
is the right
and,
way
know,
to do it?
Well, it's one way of. At least he makes us talk now about him. You know, I don't think
Not in the
anybody
best
knows
way.
Patel in among my friends here in Paris or so. He's unknown.
That's true.
To
He is
the
unknown,
Western
and he is the
public, you
guy
know.
he went principality by principality to negotiate the
absolutely,
creation of
yes.
India. You know.
Without him, Gandhi and Nehru, I don't think they would have ever been these heroes of India.
And if they'd let him do Kashmir, it might have turned out differently. But that's another story.
But it is the run-up to a general election next year, so we can only ask why now, why the timing for this statue at this point?
Yes, but it's good if Modi gives signs that he is a non-religious prime minister of India. You know, with all this is at least not all this Hinduism, nationalism thing which he's usually giving us. And
Yeah, it's true.
Are you convinced, Christopher Hickey?
You know, I defer to Georg on this. I mean, he spent a lot of time in India. And honestly, I confess, I don't know much about Patel or his role in Indian history. So in that sense, I'm glad they built a statue, and I learned from Georg something I didn't know.
thank you, Christopher.
We'll leave it there for now. I want to thank you, Christopher Hickey, for joining us from Washington. I want to thank the rest of our panel, Georg Blume, Anna Navarro, Pedro, Gregory Viscusi. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Charlie James.
Hello there.
We begin with, I think I know what you're going to talk about, a very tragic postscriptum to a story that was broken by the New York Times earlier this week.
That's right. So it's a story we've been covering quite a bit this week. Amal Hussein, the 7-year-old girl who was featured prominently in a New York Times story about the war and famine in Yemen, has died. It was this photo of her that really drew a lot of global attention to this story, with readers writing the Times asking how they could help, asking for updates about her status. Well, now Thursday, the Times International editor tweeted that, "I'm sorry to report that Amal Hussein is dead." The 7-year-old featured in a searing photograph by Tyler Hicks died from malnutrition caused by the Saudi-led war against Yemen. Her mother, Maryam Ali, told the paper that her heart is broken, that she was always smiling, and that now she's worried about her other children. And there are many, many other children affected by this. In fact, 1.8 million severely malnourished children in Yemen right now. So a sad ending to her life. It has brought a lot of attention, renewed attention, along with the Khashoggi story to this war, but a really sad update to her life.
Yeah, there was, Gregory Viscusi, there was debate going on this week because there was this kind of an about-face by the United States calling on all sides to attend the next peace conference on Yemen next month, and people wondering, was it the death of one man, Khashoggi, or
I think it's a combination of just attention on the Saudis and the fact that we've just sort of given them carte blanche for that Trump has given them carte blanche. And to be honest, it wasn't like Obama stood up to them very strongly either.
You're right.
Giving them carte blanche to whether it's domestic oppression or whether it was the war in Yemen, and suddenly there was a spotlight shown on Saudi Arabia. After, I think it began with Khashoggi, and that seemed to give the cover for people to at least sort of revive the Yemen thing. But I mean, we've been talking about Yemen for a long time. I don't know why it always takes one photo. You know, if you read that 10,000 children have died from cholera, people just pass over it. But you see one photo of one kid, and suddenly people notice. That's just sort of how the human nature in journalism seems to work.
Another story, great cause. I gotta say, it's not the catchiest name, though. International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. It's a bit of a mouthful.
A little bit, yes, but an important day. We've been giving it a lot of coverage here on France 24, decreed by the United Nations. And there's a social media campaign aspect to it as well. UNESCO has started the hashtag Truth Never Dies, which is a little easier to hold on to there. And they are using this across all of their social media platforms to draw attention to these stories of more than 1,000 journalists who have been murdered during the last 12 years because of their jobs. And they're saying by sharing their stories, it helps keep them alive. And, you know, this is a story that has hit us here at France 24 as well. Two journalists, Ghislaine Dupont and Claude Verlon, who were from our sister station, RFI.
Murdered 5 years ago today.
In Mali while reporting. And a big part of this campaign is also about justice. 90% of the perpetrators who kill the journalists are never brought to justice. And that includes with these two, with Claude and Ghislaine as well. And this campaign is really also about trying to keep their stories alive, to put pressure and call justice for the people who have been killed. One tweet I want to point out by a journalist in Germany, Nidal Salah Eldin, who says the majority of journalists killed in 2017 were killed in countries not experiencing armed conflict. I think a lot of viewers might think, when you think of journalists being killed on the job, you think of war zones, you think of conflict zones. In fact, it was journalists covering drug cartels and corruption that were killed more than anybody else. So while Syria was the most dangerous country to work in, if you were covering corruption, it was actually, you were much more likely to be killed.
Yeah,
and Mexico.
There's a lot of brave reporting coming out of Mexico.
Yeah, so in Mexico, an example of that. So one journalist, Javier Valdez, who was killed while covering the drug cartels. So if viewers want to learn more about these types of stories, a lot of people online sharing using this hashtag Truth Never Dies across all social platforms, so you can find out more.
All right, an ad for Israeli clothing has caught your eye.
So it's caught a lot of people's eye, but not in a good way. So it's for the brand Hoodies, and it features the Israeli supermodel Bar Raffaeli. We can play that ad now for you. It begins with her wearing a niqab, and then the phrase, "Is Iran watching?" comes up in Hebrew. At that point, Raffaeli throws off the niqab and revealing her outfit underneath, while the song lyrics talk about freedom, finally breaking chains, costing my freedom. And the final tagline there, freedom is basic. So the response has been highly critical, which I don't think is much of a surprise, but some of the tweets here, one user, Miriam, saying this has to be the most ignorant and racist ad I've ever seen. I can't believe a whole company approved this. I'm disgusted and at a loss for words. A BBC journalist pointing out, Bar Raffaeli, did no one tell you that women in Iran don't wear niqab and that you're being used to spread misinformation? So the headscarf is compulsory, but not the face covering. So this isn't even really an accurate representation of what most women wear in Iran. Some people saying the anger here is misdirected. One user, Brian Joseph, saying millions of women are forced to wear Islamic veils. Those who resist are jailed and subjected to violence. Maybe the outrage should be directed at the governments of Saudi Arabia and Iran instead. And
finally, the hottest social media star of the week.
It's a duck. This duck, to be exact.
It's because the rain is back.
It's a mandarin duck who showed up in New York City's Central Park last month and has developed quite a fan base. Here is some video of him. So this species is actually native to East Asia, but he showed up in Central Park. People speculate that someone was keeping him as a pet, which is illegal in New York. So no one's going to be coming forward to claim him, but he has been getting a lot of attention online, people tracking his location every single day, and he has been dubbed New York's most eligible bachelor by New York Magazine.
I hope he's all right for the winter, though.
He's welcome to stay as long as he wants, according to the Parks Department.
All right, Shirley James, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.